The opposition leader Mark Golding today held court inside Gordon House as he made his contribution to the budget debate for the 2025-26 fiscal year. The opposition leader spoke at length about housing and a raft of proposals that his PNP administration will implement to make the elusive dream for many of home ownership that much easier. He also touched on constitutional reform and the issue of Portmore becoming the next parish. He said the opposition have filed a suit in the Constitutional Court to prevent the government from proceeding with that. So today on Lead Story is not analysis. We present to you the highlights of Mark Golding's fifth presentation as opposition leader. The opposition leader's presentation stretched to about 90 pages or more, and it was titled Championing Change, Growth, Opportunity and Progress for All. Now, it's important to get to the centerpiece of the presentation, at least in my view, and the centerpiece of that proposal was the aspect concerning housing, the NHT, and how a PNP administration will use the NHT in a manner that gives everyone a chance, everyone desirous of a housing solution, a chance to get same. Mark Golding says, look, what's been happening to the NHT over time has been mismanagement at best. The government, he says, continues to take 11.4 billion out of the NHT. We will end that, he says, and we will ensure that the NHT works best for low-income earners, for young prospective homeowners, and for those who can only afford to rent. He announced a novel way in which renters can become owners. Let's hear Golding on the NHT today.
Mr. Speaker, with a focus on building houses that are affordable to the people, the next PNP administration will take a multi-pronged strategy to tackling the housing crisis. Our first strategy is a set of measures relating to the National Housing Trust. We will stop the annual extraction of the $11.4 billion from the NHT to fund the budget. Mr. Speaker, when this was originally conceived, it was written into the law as a 4-year fiscal measure in the hardest of times during a tough IMF program when our debt was spiraling out of control. It was never our intention that it would go beyond 2017. This government criticized it very trenchantly when they were in opposition. They even supported a lawsuit, which was ultimately unsuccessful, to challenge it. But then they turned around when they got into government and they have extended it for an additional 8 years since 2017, including once again in this budget for 2025-26. Mr. Speaker, we will end this annual extraction of resources from the NHT. And our plan is to recapitalize the NHT with lands to restore value for the $136.8 billion that has been taken from it to fund successive budgets over the last 12 years. We will also repurpose the NHT to have its focus on its core mandate of providing affordable houses to contributors. Using this recapitalization mechanism, we will exclude the cost of land from the price of houses built by the NHT over the next 5 years, passing through a reduction of between $2.5 and $3 million to contributors purchasing those homes. That is social and economic justice for the contributors whose institution has been depleted of resources to ease the final burden on the country. Teachers, nurses, police officers, and other public servants, young professionals, persons with disabilities, and indeed an individual contributing to the NHT will be able to afford their own home. Mr. Speaker, the People's National Party knows that public sector workers are hurting from the way in which the pay rationalization was done. So we have come up with 3 measures to show our appreciation for their service to the nation. Our second strategy is a special National Housing Trust package of benefits for public servants, young people, and low-wage earners. Firstly, public sector workers. They used to enjoy a preferred rate of interest on their NHT loans, but this government took it away. We will restore public sector workers access to a reduction in their NHT interest rates. Police, nurses, teachers, doctors, firefighters, indeed all public servants who are NHT borrowers will get back this benefit. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we will give public sector workers a break when it comes to commencing their loan payments. Currently, when an NHT loan is disbursed, the borrower has to commence payments in the following month. We recognize that buying a home has a lot of other costs attached to it. We will therefore allow a public sector worker a 3-month moratorium period after disbursement of the loan before commencing any loan payments. And that will give them time to recover the expenses they've incurred, to buy some furniture, and to get their place ready to move in. And Mr. Speaker, we have one more goodie for our public sector workers. Currently, the debt service ratio, the DSR, required by the NHT is 33.3%. That means that the loan payments each month cannot exceed 33 1/3 of their gross salary. We are extending a preferred 40% debt service ratio to public sector workers for their NHT loans to allow them room to borrow a larger loan from the NHT to buy their home. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that often the hardest hurdle for young people in buying a home is the deposit. Well, young people, we have you in mind. The next PNP government will establish a special Young Owners Deposit Fund of $1 billion within the NHT. Using those NHT resources to enable young persons under 35 years of age to access $500,000 towards their deposit once they have been an NHT contributor for 2 years or more. They will be able to apply to the NHT and get their $500,000 deposit grant. Time come for young Jamaicans to own a home.
Yeah, the rent-to-own program is a bit that we did not get in that clip, but I'll just mention it when we come back from this break. This is Lead Story on CVM TV, bringing you the highlights of the opposition leader's contribution to the budget debate earlier today. Welcome back to Lead Story here on CVM TV, bringing you the best bits of Mark Golding's contribution to the budget debate. Moments ago, he completed a 3-hour presentation in the House of Representatives. Additional to what you heard him say about the NHT, he also had something for people who earn their living in the informal sector, saying that those who are unable to produce a pay slip to establish their income, that they'll roll out an NHT rent-to-own plan to address 2 situations. So the person in the informal economy who wants to buy an NHT house, the opposition leader says, will be go into possession as a tenant. So the NHT house that they want to buy, they can rent that house firstly, and then they'll pay a monthly rent equivalent to a mortgage loan payment. And that establishes their credibility for credit. And then after a period, they'll then be deemed eligible to access the mortgage loan to buy the NHT house. So that's one form of the rent-to-own plan that the PNP has. The other aspect of the rent-to-own plan is for persons who simply can't save enough to come up with a deposit to buy the house. So you'll rent the NHT house under the NHT rent-to-own program. And once a specific portion of the rent payments, perhaps 50 or 75% of the rent payments, adds up to the deposit, that person will be treated as having paid the deposit and then can access a mortgage loan for the balance to buy the house. So those are 2 ways the PNP administration, Mark Golding says, will solve the issue of persons not being able to own their own home. He also dealt with the issue of Portmore becoming the next parish, and this was a flashpoint between the government and the opposition members.
The current arrangements with respect to the governance of Portmore emerged out of a highly consultative and democratic process led by the people of Portmore themselves. We feel strongly that the people of Portmore must be the ones to decide whether they want to give up their status as a city municipality or not. After all, Portmore enjoys unique participatory governance innovations, such as they get to directly elect their mayor. They're the only community in Jamaica that does that. And the inclusion of community stakeholders in the committees of their council, which is provided for by their charter, is also a unique feature. There is no other municipality which directly elects its mayor. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, a fundamental change which would deprive them of those rights should not be foisted on them by the government of the day. It must not be used as a backhanded device either to adjust electoral boundaries. It must not be used as a backhanded device to adjust electoral boundaries. Where is the member for Southwest St. Catherine? Where is he? Because he is the one. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Present. There's a point of order.
My point, Mr. Speaker, I'm standing on a point of order. I am a resident of Portmore. No, I'm not going to say it.
So we don't move on.
I am a resident of Portmore. And I have to say, the leader of opposition is misleading the House. My member of parliament is a member of my member of parliament. I am able to vote for a member of parliament, and I am not able to vote for a mayor.
I don't know what you're talking about, member. I don't know what you're talking about. But the Local Governance Act provides for the election of the mayor of the city municipality of Port. Well, I'm not talking about her. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Members.
Mr. Speaker.
Members. Members, we are still in this house and we are asking that we conduct ourselves in a way I will rule according to how it is supposed to be done. The leader of the opposition.
Portmore, that was the only flashpoint in the 3-hour presentation, the issue of Portmore and the intervention by the Member of Parliament for West Rural St. Andrew, who is a resident of Portmore. More after this. So Mark Golding's presentation, championing change, growth, opportunity and progress for all. On the issue of Portmore that caused the flashpoint, the comment that may have irked Juliet Cuthbert Flynn, the Member of Parliament for West Rural St. Andrew and resident of Portmore, was that comment from the opposition leader that, look, by moving in this way to make Portmore the country's 6th or 15th parish, what the government is effectively doing is disenfranchising those Portmore people who vote to directly elect their mayor. He's saying he's removing that luxury, that facility, that right, he's saying, from the Portmore people. Juliet Cuthbert Flynn rose on a point of order to say, well, you're misleading the House because I live in Portmore and I can't vote for the mayor. I can vote for the councillor, I can vote in the local government election, and I can vote for the Member of Parliament, but I can't vote for the mayor. That's because some people who live in Portmore are prohibited from voting for the mayor directly based on how the realignment of Portmore has gone over the years. It's a very odd thing, and many people who say, yes, make it into a parish are residents of Portmore who are upset at that fact that they live in the municipality, pay taxes in the municipality, but unlike many other people, or most of the residents there, they can't vote directly for the mayor. That's what caused the flashpoint. Let's finish up this Portmore point that the opposition leader was making.
Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that the people of Portmore have the right to elect the mayor of the city municipality directly. There was a separate ballot in the local government elections in February last year. They voted for their councillor and they voted separately for their mayor. And we are saying that for them to be deprived of that right.
Mr. Speaker, again, the leader of the opposition is misleading the people of Jamaica. I voted in the local government election and I was only able to vote for a councillor. There was no separate ballot to vote for a mayor.
Mr. Speaker, I cannot speak to the particular circumstances of that member. I am making a general point, an accurate general point. She must know why she can't vote. Mr. Speaker, I wish to move on, if I may. Mr. Speaker, the approach being taken by this government to the establishment of Portmore as a parish, the approach being taken by this government to the establishment of Portmore as a parish is a dangerous incursion into long-settled processes for re-establishing electoral boundaries. The act that was passed, which establishes the Portmore parish boundary, does not integrate with the existing electoral boundaries. The Constitution does not allow constituency or divisional boundaries to span parish boundaries. So it will necessitate a realignment of the constituency and electoral boundaries to align with the parish. Mr. Speaker, the gerrymandering motives behind this initiative were publicly expressed by a former member of the cabinet of this government and have never been refuted. Never. Mr. Speaker, we strenuously argued and then voted against the legislation, primarily because the legislated boundaries of that new parish will necessitate realigning several constituency and divisional electoral boundaries without the settled processes of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica having first been engaged and in violation of the requirements of the Constitution. Profound concerns with this approach have also been raised by the present and a former chairman of the Electoral Commission, by a former director of elections, all of whom have made it clear that if the implementation of the legislation is not halted, it will result in a constitutional crisis. Mr. Chairman, the chairperson of the People's National Party has written to the minister with responsibility for local government, in whose name the bill was tabled and who piloted the legislation through this House, to seek certain assurances in this regard. None have been forthcoming. Mr. Speaker, since 1980, Jamaica moved to establish an electoral system in which important decisions to do with constituency boundaries are vested in the ECJ, which has bipartisan representation. The convention since then has been that decisions which result from the processes of the CCJ being followed are implemented with bipartisan support in this House. This institutional innovation has contributed greatly to the elimination of political violence in the country. It is very sad to see this government going down a path that will undermine this transformational national achievement. And I urge the Prime Minister to ensure that as part of his legacy to Jamaica, this inconceived legislation is not brought into effect. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, yesterday, we filed suit in the Constitutional Court to strike down the legislation. We regard the pursuit of this legislation as a dangerous affront to Jamaica's democracy, which must be vigorously resisted by all lawful means at our disposal.
So see you in court is what the opposition leader is saying, where the issue of Portmore becoming the country's 15th parish is concerned. The opposition, he says, has filed a suit in the Constitutional Court to prevent that from happening. I have to go back to housing because, again, it was a centerpiece of the opposition leader's presentation, and I don't want you to leave feeling that he only said what we played, because apart from saying that the next PNP administration will build 50,000 affordable housing units over the next 5 years, he says that all 50,000 of those will be one-bedroom starter units. So he's giving you a start and you add on as you can afford to. He mentioned a third part of the PNP's housing strategy, which will be called the Program for the Orderly Renewal and Transformation of Infrastructure in All Areas, the acronym PORTIA. It will involve the tearing down of zinc fences and the replacement of those zinc fences with concrete walls. It will be the completion of Operation Pride projects that have been left unfinished, which he says the JLP administration has left ignored over the past 9 years. In order to fund the Porsche plan, he says the PNP administration will be using a mixture of sources, some funds from the Consolidated Fund and some of the profits generated from the low-income houses built by the Housing Agency of Jamaica. Oh yes, the Housing Agency of Jamaica. He says the second part of the strategy is to be the Housing Agency of Jamaica, the lead developer for low-income housing in the island. Because of course, he says private developers aren't building low-income housings because the return on the low-income housing units are not that great. So they're servicing the middle and upper level income band of the housing market because that's where the greatest returns are. He says that there's a gap that the housing agency can be repurposed to fill. So in my view, housing was the big punch from the opposition leader today, and there's a lot to chew over from the policies he has put on the table, including reduced interest rates for public sector workers and of course benefits for teachers and anybody who works in the government's service. All right, so that's what we heard, 89 pages long. The opposition leader's presentation was tomorrow, Wednesday. Yeah, if all things are equal, we'll be back here with analysis of what Mark Golding told the nation earlier on this day. That's my time. Good evening.